everybody knows he's the chair of ShelterBox for District 7610, and he's been a part of ShelterBox for a long time. He's a member of Springfield Rotary Club, and he was also past Rotarian of the Year for District 7610. And let me tell you, Wayne is very, very, very passionate about this work, and had the pleasure of him speak to my club a couple weeks ago. We've had him before. He makes his rounds every year, and his story about his involvement and ShelterBox in general is very compelling. The work ShelterBox is doing all over the globe is nothing short of stellar. And I think it's a great example to show that Rotary has no bounds. I mean, this went from a Rotary program to an international NGO, thousands of people around the world. And I tell you, Wayne is a remarkable human being. And I am very glad to have him in our district, and very glad to have him on the phone with us today and presenting. So before I turn it over to Wayne, I'll let people know you can press your space bar to unmute. Everybody will be mute. When you have a question, you can either press your space bar and to unmute, ask your question, and you can press it again to mute back. But without further ado, Mr. Wayne Chiles. Thank you, sir.
All right, let's see. Okay, as I look over the members who are on the call today, I think most of you have heard or seen of ShelterBox. So I'm going to kind of run through the first couple of slides pretty quickly to get to the meat. This is an image that is very familiar to the volunteers for ShelterBox who actually deploy. This is the condition for which we exist. Let's see, okay. Right now, around the world, about 85 million people have been displaced by natural disaster and conflict. That's more than any other time in our history since World War II. This gives you an indication of the places where ShelterBox has operated since the year 2000, when we were founded as a Rotary Club project. Over that time, we've responded to over 300 different disaster events, served in over 107 countries, and sheltered from this one project, one man's inspiration, sheltered 1.5 million people around the world. ShelterBox is a cutting-edge international charity. Our volunteer responders deliver our equipment. It is a gift of hope. It is a gift provided by our donors to these families at one of the worst times in their lives. This image encapsulated basically the whole reason for our existence. The temporary shelter, the white dome tent, but that's just to help the family survive. It is their resourcefulness that helps them to rebuild their homes, their lives, and ultimately their communities. ShelterBox is building peace one family at a time. A picture of our original model, kind of the standard pack that we used to deliver on a regular basis. The big white bag that you see next to the green box is the family size tent that you just saw in the picture. We've got sleeping blankets, we've got water filtration, water care containers, pots and pans, mosquito nets, Luminade light, activity packs for the small children, and basic tools. The big green box is the standard. That's the way we used to operate. Today, we've got a whole range. This is a picture from the Philippines of the materials from our shelter kit, deployed in such a way that this family has created a structure. We may have provided the corrugated iron, the structural members, the white tarps and the fasteners are part of our shelter kit. Quickly gets that family back into a more stable living condition, oftentimes on their same property, in their same neighborhood, so that they can continue to survive and deal with the other aspects of the disaster. We're a partner with Rotary International. Right now, ShelterBox is an independent charity, completely separate from Rotary. But starting in 2012, we became Rotary's only project partner for disaster relief. Rotary is the greatest asset that ShelterBox has. Without Rotary, much of our work would be impossible. You Rotarians in our district support many of the projects and contribute to ShelterBox generously. When our teams deploy, in many cases, usually following natural disaster, Rotary is the first organization that we contact, and they assist us in more ways than I could enumerate here. I don't need to tell this group about the coronavirus, but what I do hope to share is the impact that that has on what ShelterBox does. This is a scene from the Syrian refugee crisis. In Syria, millions of people, multiple families, have been displaced. And many of them have been displaced on a serial basis. Excuse me. Excuse me. The conditions that you see there are completely typical. You see families jammed together. You see structures that are pieced together with whatever the families could find. You see unsanitary conditions. You see, if you can read the slide, you see Relief Aid, who is one of our partners. Our teams can't actually operate physically in Syria because of the conflict. So we work through trusted partners. A painful slide. We have a few women on the group. It's probably not necessary to state this, but more than 75% of the disabled members of families are women, and I should have said displaced families are women and children. They are completely vulnerable in a refugee situation. Around the world, the World Health Organization and countries have started the process of trying to scale up the health resources. But in most of the countries where we serve, um, the health resources available, particularly to refugee families, are very limited. This is another image from Syria to illustrate another condition that is part of this dilemma. The World Health Organization indicates that of the hospitals in Syria, about 57 are damaged, and of those 37 are completely shut. The other problem in a place like Syria, as many of you probably already know, Syria was a pretty well developed country before the civil war began in 2011. But of the medical personnel in Syria, about 30,000 of the medical people have left the country. Not surprisingly, their livelihood was threatened. So the medical resources available to the refugees there are limited. This is the kind of assistance ShelterBox can provide. As we all know, the quickest, most effective way to try to slow the progression of the coronavirus threat is social distancing. If you remember the slide earlier of the refugee camp, you can't distance in that environment. You don't have health conditions. Hygiene is a dangerous challenge. So safe, temporary shelter is a critical element to their survival. This slide shows the arrows on the left side show the countries where ShelterBox is trying to respond at this time. The numbers you see are from early April. And as we all know from our experience here, those numbers, A, cannot be accurate because of the nature of the countries that they're trying to measure. And secondly, these numbers are from so long ago that the current situation is far worse than what we see there. But that's where ShelterBox is trying to be active. Somaliland, one of the things we're trying to do in Somaliland and in other areas of the continent of Africa is provide more information about hygiene and how to protect the members of the family. These are our partners there. If you know anything about Somaliland, and I certainly don't, it is a part of Somalia that is not recognized officially, but is recognized by many countries in the Western world. It has been suffered serious drought for a number of years. The refugees that we serve are often nomadic people who are having to move their families and their flocks of animals to find grazing area. And as the drought has damaged the crops and the foliage, those areas become even more difficult to find. Lady using ShelterBox type equipment. In our boxes, we've ramped up some of the materials that we're putting in there. We've always had cooking capabilities, water filtration, so that the families can prepare a warm meal. They don't have to go to a communal serving area. They don't have to share food or cooking utensils with their neighbors. They have the wherewithal to do those things themselves. We also include mattresses, sleeping blankets, so that we're trying to ensure that the family members are warm and dry in their shelters. Keeping them well is another important criteria for their ability to survive the coronavirus epidemic. So pictures from a typical deployment. As I mentioned earlier, in many places we work with partners. Our partners have adopted the same protections that you and I have adopted in terms of social distancing, wearing masks, the trucks and things are cleaned before the distribution. We try to distribute to smaller groups and maintain social distancing as much as possible. But the idea certainly is not to, for our volunteers or supporters, not to transmit the virus and also not to become infected. This is a picture from Cameroon. Cameroon is one of 4 countries in the Lake Chad Basin of Central Africa. Those of you who might be familiar with that part of the world know that many of those countries, we're talking about Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria, have been threatened because of actions by Boko Haram and other groups that have attacked the villages. Many families, again, women and children, have escaped into the Minawao refugee camp. It was originally set up to serve about 12,000 people, as I understand. It is currently serving about 60,000 people. Imagine social distancing or safe water or other services in an environment like that. ShelterBox is the only organization currently delivering tents to this refugee environment. And we're trying to ramp up our ability to serve more. Another image from Syria. Also in Syria, we are trying to provide more equipment. We have been working around Syria and providing equipment into Syria since 2012. It is the longest single deployment in history, in the 20-year history of ShelterBox. And it's not slowing down. In fact, the need is even greater. We're providing hand washing basins and soap to try to protect the members of those families. And the more tents we can get in there, the better. So the bottom line, ShelterBox is trying to be a player, trying to make an impact in this difficult environment for families who are at the end of their rope. We can only imagine what the coronavirus, knowing how it has affected our communities with all the support and resources we have, many of these families are going to suffer terrible tragedy. Our help is needed, and ShelterBox is trying to be a representative of Rotary in this environment. Many clubs in our district are generous donors, and if you're from one of those clubs and are on this call now, I can only say thank you. We have a number of hero clubs giving a minimum of $1,000. The hero is the club that provides resources to ShelterBox, even though it is not responding immediately to a crisis situation. Now, that's sort of a double-edged sword, because the practical matter is ShelterBox is always responding to a disaster situation. But the gifts that we receive allow us the capability, the capacity to have equipment on hand so we can respond. I am a volunteer. I'm looking for individuals or clubs that are willing to talk about this, even in small groups. And for each of you who are on social media, I ask you to please share our message. This pretty much says it all. Our compassion and our humanity is needed at this critical time. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Wayne. Any questions for Wayne regarding ShelterBox and the work you're doing?
This is Ellen Wessel. So Wayne, so nice to see you. Question in terms of cooperation with other international aid groups that respond to these crises, and how you go about coordinating so that it's an efficient use of everybody's resources and not duplication or leaving some places unassisted at all.
Excellent question, Helen. When our teams go into the country that we're going to serve, excuse me, let me get out of here so I can see you. Nope, that's not it. There. Now, back to, oh, here we go. All right, what's going on? I'm sorry. When our team, when we decide, commit to deploy, we will send a team of people into the country, and they will make an assessment. They will work with the government. They will work with the shelter cluster, which is a gathering of other organizations that provide shelter type solutions. They will work with local Rotarians, and they will work to figure out who's got what type of equipment, where is the greatest need, how do we get to where we need to get to, how do we get our equipment there. And that often is a significant challenge, because we may send a team of just 4 people or so. Oftentimes, that's where the local Rotarians become just a dramatic element in our work. They may be able to help us with transportation. The equipment we send, of course, is going to come into a safe port. So, and our focus is always going to be to get to the most vulnerable families in a remote area so that we can serve them where other organizations may not be willing to make the effort to go there. I don't know why I can't get a full picture here. What am I doing? Oh, there we go. There, excuse me. Duh. I'm sorry, did I answer the question?
Yeah. And I guess a follow-on to that would be which international organizations you have seen being the most, I guess, cooperative and I guess effective in meeting the needs of all these people. You know, I hear a lot from International Rescue Committee and then of course UN agencies. Are you seeing other international groups providing effective support?
That's a difficult question for me to answer because my volunteer role is within our district. I am not qualified as a response team member, the ones who actually go and do. We work with organizations like International Red Cross, Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity is frequently mentioned because if we're providing a temporary shelter, we're looking for them to come in behind and provide more.
Interesting.
But in each country, it seems to be a different organization. International Organization for Migration. We're regularly working with the UN. ShelterBox is one of 2 organizations, along with the Red Cross, that are certified to manage disaster responses in a natural disaster environment. We work with the UN on humanitarian crisis activities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Wayne. I have a 2-part question as well. This is Stephanie Arnold. I'm president of the Falls Church Rotary Club. And as a club who might be interested in supporting ShelterBox, can you give me a sense of what type of donation or what amount of donation would fund certain types of things? Like how much is 1 tent? How much are 10 tents? And then my second question is, are there cases when ShelterBox has wanted to assist but has not been able to for one reason or another?
Good question, Stephanie. First off, when we talk about donations, we often speak about $1,000 to sponsor a complete big green box. That is a loaded figure. That is also the threshold for a club to be a ShelterBox hero. That is a figure that may cover a whole spectrum. Sometimes we deliver big green boxes. That was the original model. Sometimes we deliver equipment in palletized form so that we can distribute precisely what members of the community need, not more, not less, and have the flexibility to make those decisions. Now, move over to your second question. Where do we go? How do we go? The decision to deploy is often made after very deliberate consideration. I'll give you, for instance, a very recent, for instance, the Bahamas storm, hurricane in the fall of 19. Obviously, huge damage. We sent a team in. They spent about a week or so evaluating the situation, going around, meeting with Rotarians and so forth. The ultimate decision was no, not at that time. We have not been called back to the best of my knowledge, and I checked on this fairly recently. What we found were several things. First off, we found that there were a whole herd of other organizations already there, including church groups and many other groups reaching out. But we also found in areas that we might have been, that our equipment might have fitted, that the damage was so severe at that point that the families had to depart the area. It was similar to what we saw in the hurricane crisis through the Caribbean in 2018. We served in a bunch of islands at that point, islands that were just decimated completely. And on follow-up, we learned that in many cases, the families who would otherwise have been there had left because there was no safe water, there was no electricity, there was no food, there was nothing to sustain them if we put up a tent for them to live in. So there has to be something more. We are not everything. We don't do food, we don't do medication. We're trying to do more with hygiene. Hope that helps.
Any last questions? Well, folks, we're right at 12:45, and we thank you for joining us again this week. And great heartfelt thanks to Wayne for being our speaker, and we look forward to supporting your work for many more years to come. Next week, we have the Perth Police Force. As you know, that was the group that was coming in March and didn't make it. We are working to get them back next spring. Hopefully, with things go well, we can do that. In the meantime, they're going to share with us a little bit about their work and what their plans are when they come stateside. The following week, we have Steve Mutton, Volunteer Fairfax, so please join us on the 28th for that. And then I'm very excited, the first, June 4th, the first Thursday in June, we have Alex Ritchie. Alex Ritchie is a Rotary actor in Rotarian out of District 7600 out of Richmond, and she is excellent. And she'll be speaking to us on how to engage younger people and make Rotary accessible to young professionals. So great line of speakers coming up, and we're working hard to fill the rest of the June slots as well. So everybody continue to be safe, continue to wave that Rotary flag, and we look forward to seeing you next Thursday at the same place, same time.
Thanks very much.